Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Bad Batch Episode 2 spoiler review. I think the episode was called Cut and Run. My name is Joe Fricke. I'm with Tristan Mayer. I thought this was a pretty solid episode. Not quite as good as the first, but it's hard to compete 30 minutes versus 70 minutes. Tristan, what were your thoughts?
Yeah, similar feelings to you. Obviously, it's a step down from the really good premiere that was much bigger in scale and bigger in length. But I thought this was a pretty solid episode. It felt very much like a standard episode probably is going to feel like go to a planet, they have an adventure, they leave kind of thing.
Yeah,
So I had a good time with it. I hope that if this is the quality we can expect from these episodic episodes, they're just kind of standalone stories. I'm really excited because if this is the low, then I feel like we've got some pretty good highs coming.
for sure, for sure. One of the things I remember saying last week was we wouldn't really know until like episode 3 or 4 if this show is going to have more of like a Rebel structure or Clone Wars structure, and I'm already pretty confident in saying the show is more of a Rebel structure. I don't really feel like we're in the middle of an arc. Maybe if we get rid of Omega by like episode 4 or 5, then it's like, okay, this was the Omega arc, but I highly, highly doubt that. But yeah,
As do I.
I would say we are not in the middle of an Omega arc. So I think this is going to be more of a Rebels format, which I think I prefer. I think I like that pathway more, especially for this show, because Clone Wars had the ability to jump around to different characters, where Rebels more followed one squad, and since we're following one squad, I think that's the way to go.
Yeah, I also want to give us points, both of us, for predicting that they're going to show Cutter. I think we
Yeah,
both called that. For once,
yeah.
we had a prediction right. I think at least I've been wrong in like practically everything I've predicted on these episode reviews, but it was fun to have one that I at least got organically and it was correct about.
Yeah, I won't hardly count myself just because I knew the next episode was called Cut and Run, and I feel like that kind of gave it away. I have no idea what next week's episode is called, so but there wasn't really a teaser. This is one I know you have a big prediction. We'll tease that moving forward, that you have a big prediction for the end of the episode. I really don't have any major predictions going forward. I know last week I also predicted that Maul might be a big thing in this show because the series opened with, the Clone Wars in the red font, which was always the Maul episodes, and then Aftermath was also in red font, but then when the Clone Wars logo burned away to reveal the Bad Batch, it was like a red font in this episode. But in this episode, there was no Clone Wars font, and the episode logo was gray. So I don't know if maybe they just had the red logo because the last time Clone Wars was on, it had a red logo. So maybe that's why. Maybe Maul will never be in the series. But so my after last week's episode, I said 100%. Would have said 100% certainty Maul will appear in season 1 of Bad Batch and will play a major role. Now I'm at the point where I'm like, Maul is probably maybe going to be more. If Maul is in this series, he's going to be like a tease at the end of the first season.
Yeah, I'm seeing Maul in this series similarly to how I was in Clone Wars and Rebels, where he's that lingering presence in your mind. You know he's coming eventually. When is he gonna come? And by season 3 or so, you finally get that reveal. Oh, here he is. He's in the show. He's gonna come back. He's gonna do something cool. And I
Yeah.
think that's what we're gonna get for him here. We're probably gonna focus on some of these Empire villains in these first couple seasons and get to a bit more of the bigger stuff later on. And you teased my prediction, and I don't want to reveal it now, but I do think that I don't want to brag or anything, Joe, but I do think that this is probably like a big prediction for not just where this show is going to go with Omega, but how that is going to kind of tie into the whole direction that Star Wars seems to be going in these TV shows, whether it's Mandalorian, maybe even the Ahsoka show, and a lot of the stuff that's been seeming to be set up between this and what I hope Dave Filoni can do with these TV shows. That's all I'm going to say now. But I'm excited to talk about the episode.
All right, cool, cool. Yeah, I do have one very minor prediction, but before we get to predictions, we've talked enough about predictions. And I also want to tease there's a conversation we're going to have after the episode. I came up with the idea this morning that every time we review The Bad Batch, we want to have like a Star Wars conversation towards the episode that kind of ties into maybe the previous episode of The Bad Batch or the current episode of The Bad Batch. And last week's episode, because of Bad Batch opening with Order 66 and Order 66 being in Revenge of the Sith and also in Clone Wars, it kind of messes with like the viewing order of what order should you watch these movies and shows in. And so that's a conversation, just a like quick conversation me and Tristan are going to have at the end of the episode after we're done discussing Bad Batch. So that's kind of the teaser for that. Tristan, let's kick it off. You got the. I assume you have the play-by-play notes here.
I have some notes. I didn't quite go through the play-by-play, but I did write down some really good, some of my emotional feelings as I was going through the episode and some of the moments that stuck out to me. And you mentioned the logo. I think it's our first time seeing like what I assume is going to be the Bad Batch intro for the rest of the, at least the season. It's not doesn't have as much of the fanfare as the Clone Wars, just kind of like a boom pop logo, and that's it. Do you have any thoughts on the intro at all and the music for it?
Not really on the music or the intro. No, I do have one thing I just wanted to bring up when we get to a little bit of one of the creatures that I like that they brought back.
Yeah, I want to talk about that too. In this opening scene here, you mentioned we're looking for what the format's going to be. Is it going to be something like Clone Wars or something like Rebels? And I think from the first scene, you kind of got the going more for the Rebels. You don't have that narrator coming in, giving you the play-by-play, throwing you into the middle of the action and saying, "Oh, let's catch you up along the way and see what's going on." You pretty much pick up from where you left off in the last episode, and I think the structure pretty much stuck out for me the most in this
Yeah,
episode. Just the way it, you get in there and you get out. You know, the plot's finished and it's solved, and the characters have their moments moving forward to talk about like Omega's arc moving forward with Hunter and what bringing cut back has really taught them about not just being a clone, but being like a parent and being part of a family. I think those are interesting things we can talk about. But yeah, I really enjoyed this. Just the beginning here. I want to. I didn't write down quite the notes I normally do. I have a couple of thoughts here as they arrive and return to this planet. We've seen it before. I know me and you both rewatched the Clone Wars episode where they set this up, but this is a character that we've previously seen in
yeah,
Clone Wars who's pretty much a clone who abandoned his post and is now living alone on this planet with his family. And he's back. His kids are grown up a little bit. We saw them as young kids in
yeah,
Clone Wars, and now they're a bit older. And the war has finally come to them, and they gotta get off the planet.
yeah. Yeah, it was interesting. One of the things I wanted to talk about was the kids, because essentially in the first one, in the first time his kids appear in that Clone Wars episode, uh, I believe it's called The Deserter, season 2, episode 10. They have like pale faces and they're supposed to be um, human and Twi'lek hybrids, essentially. And Pablo Hidalgo said on Twitter that yes, they are hybrids, but they aren't Cut's kids, because obviously Cut hasn't been around long enough to have, like 7 and 10-year-old kids, or however old they were, little kids, however old they're supposed to be. But then you cut to this episode, and like they don't have the pale faces and they look pure Twi'lek. So part of me wonders if they kind of went back on that, and now they were always supposed to be pure Twi'lek and just kind of ignore the fact that they had like pale splotches on their faces. Because you look at like Jason Syndulla in the finale of Rebels, who looks nothing like that they looked. So maybe they're just trying to be like, okay, they're just pure Twi'lek. Ignore the fact that they had weird faces, because they didn't have that this episode.
Yeah, if we've learned anything in the first 2 episodes of the show, it's that it's canon until it's not canon. You know,
Yeah,
like
yeah,
it counts until the writers
yeah,
decide let's not do that anymore.
yeah,
So that might be one of those things where they're like, actually, never mind. Let's just go with the easy answer and make them just Twilight.
yeah. Yeah, because I think if I had my guess, I would say originally when they wrote the episode they were supposed to be Cut's kids, but then they thought about it and they were like, wait a minute, if they're Cut's kids, that at most they would be like a year and a half years old. So okay, never mind, they're still hybrids, but they're somebody else's kids. And then they probably thought that's too complicated. They never explicitly said in the episode that they're half Twi'lek, half human. So moving forward, they're just full Twi'lek.
Oh yeah, I don't mind that. I think it
Yeah,
was cool to see them again. They didn't look quite the same, but I
yeah,
recognized that it was them and they were a bit older and
yeah,
looked a lot better than the PS2 graphics they got in that season 2
yeah,
episode.
yeah. It was far better.
Shocking when you go back and watch some of those old episodes compared to what we get now. Even this
Yeah,
episode, I thought the animation was a small bit of a step down from the first episode and quality
yeah,
wise, but
yeah.
it still looked great. They
Yeah.
had some pretty good action scenes and really good detail shots in the characters. I want to mention the scene too where Omega just casually mentions like, "Oh yeah, you guys had that inhibitor chip." Like, like
Yeah,
there's all this secrecy around the inhibitor
yeah,
chip and like all this build of what's happening, what's Order 66, what's going on, how are the clones doing this, and then Omega just like, oh yeah, probably that inhibitor chip there that you guys got,
Yeah.
and then that's all you get.
Yeah. Yeah, I like that Omega and Tak seem to know more than everyone else in this series. Like, Tak just assumes everyone is as smart as him, and that when they're not, he's just like, oh, you didn't know? Well, okay then. Yeah, and
Works for
Omega,
Johnny.
yeah. and then and then Omega is obviously because she like was on Camino the whole time, uh, and it was super close to the doctors at on Camino. She knows is obviously going to absorb more than just the clones kind of there doing their training and stuff. So
Yeah, Omega has a bit of an arc in this episode where essentially at this point, Hunter has decided that he's going to leave Omega with the family. He doesn't tell her this yet, but he's decided that's his plan. He's going to leave her with this clone that he knows can be fatherly and raise her as a kid and not bring her into these combat scenarios.
and
And
yeah,
it closed that arc by the end of the episode, which is interesting too.
that's definitely an original plot line that I've never seen in a Star Wars project before.
Yeah, I mean, I was groaning a bit when they introduced that. I was like, oh god, are we gonna have like a whole season of them being like, you can't come with us, and then she somehow gets back on the ship like every other episode. I'm a bit happy that it seems at least
So,
like by the end of this one episode we've already solved the problem. Like he's already like,
uh,
okay, you're one of us. Like we're not gonna
uh,
have next episode them fighting over
yeah.
this exact same problem again and again and again.
Yeah, I think they kind of were like speed ran the plot line of the Mandalorian of like she's just with them now and they're not going to try to get rid of her again and that's just how it is. I was initially hesitant that I was like, okay, is this just going to be like the Mandalorian but with four guys instead of one? And I think what this show more is going to be too is because the Mandalorian obviously has money built up from jobs he's pulled in the past and other things where I feel like these guys have no money. And there's even stuff in the trailer of them having to work to be mercenaries. So I think part of the show is going to be them pulling jobs, trying to make money while also looking after her. It's going to be, I would argue that this show is going to be more like three men and a baby, but just four men and a little, Mandalorian chick or clone chick.
4 men in
Then,
the Force of clone.
yeah than just the Mandalorian. I feel like that's more what it would be similar to.
Yeah, this is giving me vibes almost of Rogue One. Like it's these people who have to exist on the edge of society, and they're kind of going in and out of the morality. Like
Yeah.
what Cassian Andor kind of acts like the rebellion is in that movie. He says like, "Oh, I had to do this since I was 10 years old or whatever.
6 years old.
I had to break the law. I had to work against." And we get this promise of like, "Oh, the rebels and the good guys had to do some bad stuff too," but we don't usually get that delivered on. Like it's just like talked about, but we don't actually see that happening. So I wonder how much they're gonna have of that. Like this growing rebellion isn't quite the good guys that we know them as.
Yeah. Another thing to jump back to. I'm sad we missed Rex by a day. I'm
They
curious
did
if
the
that.
little tease.
I'm curious if that means we'll run into him soon, or if that's just kind of like a little drop of like, oh, just for any Rex fans out there, that's where Rex immediately went after Order 66.
I definitely hope that every planet they go to, they're like, "Oh, you missed Rex. He was just here. He was here like just a day ago.
Yeah.
What a chance."
Yeah.
Reminds me of
funny.
Kingdom Hearts or something. They're like, "Oh yeah, Riku was there a second ago. You guys just missed him. They'll find you him eventually."
Yeah.
But yeah, we get from there to. I thought this was interesting when we get the cut. His name's Cut, or is it Cutter? Cut, and the clones and Hunter are now walking through this kind of taken over version of the city now. Like what we saw in Clone Wars was them before this new empire, and it's like somewhat dystopian. Like the empire they introduce, I don't remember what they're called off the top of my head, but some kind of code they use to qualify people.
Oh, the chain code?
The chain code, yeah, and that's something that was mentioned in Mandalorian and a couple of other things that now we see like the beginnings of that here. And I really like the stark difference between this and what we get in like Clone Wars era Star Wars. It's very much oblique. You feel like you stepped from the prequels into the kind of original trilogy era.
Yeah, this felt almost a lot more like a Rebels episode than a Clone Wars episode because the tone and everything. But also, to me, this shows like Palpatine had a plan. Like this is at most like 2 weeks after Order 66, and he's already like uniforms are doled out. Chain codes are put into place.
He's got the barricades. It's ready to go.
Yeah, he had this shit lined up. He knew exactly what he wanted to do as soon as he took over.
Yeah, I felt that too, and there was a moment where I was like, "Wow, they got up pretty quick. I don't know if I buy this." But then I thought, like, well, the whole prequels are essentially people saying like, "Oh, there's problems, but we'll get through it," or like he's maybe taking too much power, but he's got
Yeah,
to. There's a war going on or whatever, and then this is the point where like they've hit that tipping point. Now there's no going back. Now he can do practically whatever he wants, and there's nothing really to stop him. Like he's
yeah,
been ready for this. And I really liked that. I like that Palpatine is this looming presence, and the Empire is very much this threat. You're not getting this gradual decay from the clone era into the Empire.
yeah,
You're just going from one to the other, and there's nothing you can do to stop it, really.
yeah. Yeah, I was really, I really like when they kind of slice in a little bit of politics for Star Wars here and there, and I thought it worked really well. It fit with the plot of the episode, and everything about it made sense. Of like, okay, they couldn't just ride with the Bad Batch because the Bad Batch were potentially wanted, and he didn't want to risk that. And then it made like everything about the plot just fit with me and made sense and fit with the politics, and I liked it.
And I wanted to let you know, I don't know if you knew this, but D. Bradley Baker is actually in this episode. He plays.
Oh, they brought because he voiced Cut in the original, didn't he? So they brought him back to
Yeah, he
voice Cut
comes
again.
back and does Cut again, which is I
That's
didn't.
that's incredible. Like I'm
Star
glad
Wars always bringing those legacy actors back.
I'm glad they could pull that off with. Dave Filoni's a fucking legend to be able to pull a move like that. Bring D. Bradley Baker up. D. Bradley Baker, who I can't. Who would have thought they would have got the guy in a voice cut to come back?
I know he really never wants to be in these Star Wars shows, and they finally got him to come into one
Uh,
episode. So I'm really cool.
yeah, I'm
Glad that
surprised they.
happened.
I'm surprised they didn't just use the guy that voices Rex to come back because they sound so similar. But
He'll come back when they do the Rex episode.
Oh, okay, yeah, that makes sense.
But one thing I do think was interesting is like in that scene where Cut and the gang are kind of walking, you could even close your eyes, and even though it's the same actor, you can hear the differences in the characters.
Yeah.
Like you can tell who's talking when. Like there's a moment when I was rewatching it and I was taking notes, and I could tell like, okay, Cut's talking now, Hunter's talking now, and you can just from the way he performs it, they're very
Yeah.
different and distinct characters. I really think that's impressive.
Yeah. Every episode they should just send him an Emmy. Like I don't know how that's even physically possible to just voice the same character, like the same voice in just different ways. It doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah, I wrote here it's very surreal seeing the clones kind of behave as stormtroopers. Like you mentioned, the rebels feel, and I think we have the rebels feel here, but it's a strange feeling to see that rebels tone within the prequel aesthetic. The clones are also there. The logos are all still New Republic. It all feels very much like the prequel era, but it's been taken over and corrupted, and I really like that aesthetic to this.
Yep, same.
Let me see what else I got in here. I started going on and on about my theory at this point. I got halfway through the episode and I was like, oh my god, Omega, I know what's going on with this. But
so as we've been talking, I do have a few theories. So when we get to that part of the show, I will bring up some of my theories.
And I do think this. Do you think we see Cutter again at all?
I was gonna ask that. I was like, was this a one-off, just like Clone Wars, where he was only in that one episode, or do you think he'll be back in I think he'll be back at some point. I think he'll be back for like maybe an episode or two in season 2. I don't think he's gonna be back of like, okay, he's gonna appear in this episode, and then episode 8, you find out his family died, and now he's just part of the Bad Batch or anything like that. I think there'll be a point where like they need help and they call Cut, or they go to Cut and he helps them again. But I think he'll be back.
Coming into the episode, I was thinking like, oh, maybe since Crosshair or Cross, whatever his name is, the sniper guy went rogue and now he's bad. He works for the Empire, and now they're down a guy in the Bad Batch. I thought, oh, maybe they're going to Cut because he's for some reason or another going to come back to the life of the war and join them in the Bad Batch. I thought that could be the direction they go, but as soon as they introduced the family and everything, I thought, oh, they're not going to go that way, because the only way they could have done that is like, oh, his family died off screen or something like that. They're captured by the Empire, some kind of way to motivate him to get into the Bad Batch. But yeah, the fact that he came and went in one episode makes me think it's like you said, he'll show up maybe for an episode in like season 3, and we'll see what his family's up to then. And then maybe like later on or something in the next show, whatever next animated show it is, will get cut again.
Yeah.
Maybe D. Bradley Baker will come back and voice him.
Maybe this is a backdoor pilot for like a sitcom about Cut and his family.
Yep, they're just on the run. They're like, God, every time we go to a distant planet, the Empire and these clones just show up. What are we doing? We're picking the wrong planets.
Yeah, and to bring back what they have a every sitcom has to have a pet, and so they have one of the Nexu, which is like that weird cat, opossum, lizard thing from Attack of the Clones that was also in this episode. So that's like their family pet. They have a baby Nexu that rides with them.
I thought that was really cool seeing that monster back. I love
Yeah,
some of the creatures in Attack of the Clones, especially
yeah,
from that like gladiator kind of scene. That whole like Geonosis
yeah,
sequence at the end of Attack of the Clones is one of those things where like it's not good when I watched it,
yeah,
but then when you watch it with the context of Clone Wars and you've seen so many of these things over and over again and all these characters, it improves that last act of Attack of the Clones. So I'm
yeah,
excited to see stuff like that connect.
for sure. Yeah, I definitely like all those little connections. That's the thing I want these shows to do, is be like, oh, here's a minor character from this. They're gonna be a minor character in that. I don't want it to always be like. Obviously, there were episode of Rebels where like Leia was there and Lando was there, but I love. I'm just trying to think timeline wise. Like, I love there to be an episode where they go to like just some random planet, and that's like, oh, remember that weird episode of the Clone Wars where they also went to that random planet? Well, here's that same guy that you barely remember. You know what I'm saying? Like, I don't
Mm-hmm.
need an episode where they hang out with R2D2 and C3PO.
Yeah, I like how they've been doing it. Like I said with the Tarkin thing last week, it's like when they have the space for it, it's cool to bring stuff in. Like, sure, they could have gone to any like off-road clone they knew or any connection they had from the past, but rather than making up a new connection from the past, they're like, okay, let's bring back one we've already done and see what they've been up to. And those little tiny connections where you don't have to watch the season 2 episode, whatever, to understand this
Yeah.
episode. All you have to know is, oh, it's a rogue clone they knew from before. You don't have to follow that plot to follow this, which I think is really interesting too, and really important when you do these connective stuff, especially like so many years later.
Yeah, like I've seen, because I rewatched that episode again today, and I've seen it a few times before, but like when they were talking to him, I was like, wait, is there like a way that like the Bad Batch was actually in that episode? Because they were talking to him like they knew him and they were friends with him. And like obviously when I went back and watched, I'm like, no, they weren't like in this episode at all. The only clone that ever interacted with them really was like Rex. And so obviously at some point or another they must have come across him themselves. So
Yeah, that's the one thing where it's like you have 20 minutes to tell a story, and it's like maybe if there was a 40-minute episode like last week, they could have a couple scenes where they bond, but they had to pretty much go from like, okay, they're meeting this guy for the first
yeah.
time and now they're friends.
Well, I mean, no, I think the way like this episode went is like they've met him before. Like they've met him and were friends with him from before. Like because Hunter says something to his wife of like, oh, I forgot how good of a shot you were and stuff like that. Where I'm like, oh, okay, they know each other from before the war, or from before like this episode, and so
That's an interesting choice. He's not doing a very good job hiding.
yeah. And one of the things that I thought, like, I'm glad they did it this way, because if they ran across him for the first time and then they had to have all of the same conversations that Rex had with him about, like, okay, why did you desert? Oh, you did it because of this. Oh, well, you're a deserter, but I get it, and now I trust you and stuff like that. We didn't need it, so just be like, hey, the war was like 4 years or 3 years long. At some point or another, the Bad Batch came across him as well. Fine, that's cool.
Yeah, at this point, the Bad Batch, like they said, we're also rogues or something like that. He mentioned like, sure, they're abandoned their post, but so did we at that point. So
Yeah.
I think they, even if they did not know him that well, or they just knew him once or heard stories, it's like, okay, what do we have that's different than him? We both gave up on the war because of our moral differences.
Yeah, and like obviously the Bad Batch clearly doesn't play by the rules and doesn't exactly do what they were told. So maybe Cut was spotted by somebody and was reported as a deserter to the Republic, and Palpatine obviously didn't want clones to start deserting left and right. They sent the Bad Batch to go kill Cut. Bad Batch meets up with him, realizes he's kind of a cool dude, and tells the Republic, "Yeah, we killed him." And that's
we killed him. We definitely got him.
No,
we killed Kanan. Also, we killed all the Jedi. Really,
yeah. We killed
Obi-Wan
a bunch of
definitely
things.
dead. We got that guy for sure. We have a scene also here. I don't know where exactly it laid out in the plot of the episode where Omega has that necklace that
head thing. Yeah, it's like that head thing.
Yeah, the headband thing, and it's connected to her and her past on Kamino and who she was raised by or created by, and she takes it off, and it's this kind of like emotional moment for her of letting go of that past. I wonder if you have any thoughts on that scene and what that might
Yeah.
mean for her as a character.
Yeah, I didn't really understand what was going on in that scene. I thought she was just like looking at it and then she would put it back on and then she didn't. So I was just kind of generally confused, but I just let it go. I didn't really know what they were trying to say there, I'll be honest. I was just like, oh, I guess because like originally I thought she was going to take it off, look at it, kind of reflect on Camino or whatever, and then put it back on. But then she didn't put it back on and I was like, oh,
Yeah, I was hoping you'd have a take on that because I was also a little bit
okay.
confused on what they were going for. But
Yeah.
my reading of it was what I pretty much said there is that I think that it was her letting go of her past on Camino,
Yeah.
and even though she doesn't like being in that kind of limited environment, she still has this emotional connection to essentially her parents that raised her, and it was her saying goodbye to people she cared about, but also this moment of letting go of
Yeah.
what she didn't love about that past and moving on
Um,
forward. Because I thought this episode as a whole was definitely about her becoming part of the Bad Batch, not just being accepted by them, but like accepting her place among them as well. So I
yeah.
think we covered a lot of ground in their relationships in this episode. Like I said, in a worse show would be like an entire season worth of drama where she's not supposed to
Uh,
be there and she keeps sticking around and she keeps coming back and
uh,
they're fighting all the time about, oh, you're just a kid, you shouldn't be
uh,
doing this. And it seems like that's not what they're going to be doing, and I hope that's not what they're
no.
doing.
No, they've already shown, like, in ways that she's proving her worth. Because at the end of the day, she is one of them. She is a clone. Like, she is engineered to be, like, a top combat person.
Yeah, and we've seen in trailers, I think that she's been in more combat
Yeah.
scenes and stuff
Yeah.
like that. So she's going
Yeah.
to have an action role. So I'm really excited to see that for her too.
Yeah, because she had that shot. Like, she shot that guy towards the end of the last episode, and then she ran the chain codes back in this episode. Like, so, like, anyone on that team that's like, oh, you shouldn't be here because you can't do it, it's like, have you watched her so far? Because she seems to be capable. Obviously,
Yeah,
you
I'm
could be
liking
like,
her character a lot.
obviously, you could be like, oh, it's dangerous for a kid, or like, oh, like, like you shouldn't have this life, you should be a kid. I could understand that take. But if they're like, oh, we don't trust you, then it's like, oh, well, watch your own show if you don't trust her, I guess.
Yeah, I'm liking her character a lot. I have
You
more
know,
to talk about with her later, but I
yeah,
think that she's a really promising and interesting
yeah,
character. A lot more than I thought that she would be, just from like, oh, they're gonna have this like little girl along with her. It's gonna be like a Grogu too,
yeah.
or it's gonna be like the Chopper type character that's just there for the kid humor.
No,
And so far, she's definitely not that.
we know what character is there for the kid humor, and it's the A+ best character on the show, and that's Wrecker, who had a great scene in this episode when Tech was trying to disable the like lock on their vehicle. I can't even remember what it was, and like he's doing typing a whole bunch of shit, and Wrecker just rips it off. I'm like, fuck yeah, that's my boy.
I'm
Wrecker's my guy.
Wrecker is a great character. I think all of these characters are really fun to hang out. Like there's people that I'm like, I can see
Yeah,
these
yeah,
guys interacting with each other. I can see
yeah,
their unique personalities all shining, and every episode they at least have like one or two moments where it's like, oh, that's their moment for the episode. That's their like you said, even Omega has a vital role in the plot.
yeah,
Everybody seems like they're there for a reason and
yeah,
they
yeah.
need to be there on the team.
Yeah. And like this isn't even speculation. This is like confirming what we should already know. I think people are just dumb. I've seen people online try to figure out like who Omega is, and to me, it's like, I mean, maybe there's more to it, but she's very clearly just like a female Jango Fett clone, right? Because I've seen people online being like, "Oh, look at her hairstyle. She's," and maybe I'm stepping on your prediction, but I've seen people online speculating, "Oh, she's like a female Palpatine clone," and I'm like, they specifically gave her a Kiwi accent on purpose. Like to
They
me
gave
that
it to her for a reason, but it might be to throw you off a little bit. But I
uh,
don't I don't know about the Palpatine clone thing. I mean, I heard about it, but I think that's a bit
to
of a
me
stretch.
to me I think the whole like if you look at actuality, the clones should not have a Kiwi accent. They should talk like the Kaminoans. Like they were never around Jango Fett. Accents aren't like inherited. Like accents don't come through your DNA. It comes through like who you're around. You know. So like they should all talk like the Kaminoans because that's the people that they heard talk and that's who they were around. But it's a fantasy movie and it's like, oh, they're clones of Jango Fett, so they sound like Jango Fett. She's a clone of Jango Fett, so she has a Kiwi accent. Like,
Yeah, we'll see about that, Joe. We'll see about the
uh,
clone theory on her. I think she has a very big role to play in the story, and I think
uh,
she connects to a lot of stuff that's been going on, whether it's in Mandalorian or whether it's even in like Rise of Skywalker. I think she
Alright.
set some stuff up.
Alright.
But like you mentioned earlier, there's this arc, this episode where Hunter is debating on leaving her, and she finds out towards the end of the episode here, and they have this big final shootout, a nice, cool, classic like rebel style action scene. It felt like that. Oh, you got to get back to the ship in time. Here come the stormtroopers, essentially, and I was pretty shocked to see that at this point they're just like straight up killing all the clones. Like I was like, oh, are they gonna like have mercy on their brothers because they know that they're possessed by these chips essentially? But at this point they're just like, oh no, you shot at us, folks, so we're just shooting at you guys.
Yeah.
You know, I especially on Disney show, I'm like, okay, are they gonna have the characters kill or are they gonna have those? Okay, somehow they're still alive type things like Batman logic.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I know they're not afraid to kill. If they're gonna kill people on Disney XD like they did with Kanan, spoiler alert, I feel like, to me, especially with an ensemble show like this, I could fully see like Tech dying in the season 1 finale. Like that's not that big of a shock to me, especially because we'll get to my predictions later. But I could see that as an option. I think Hunter has plot armor. I think Omega has plot armor. But outside of that, I could see any of the other of the Bad Batch. I guess that just leaves Tech and Echo and Wrecker. I could see any of those three dying at any point. Because Hunter is clearly like the lead of the show.
Yeah, and especially as we get further along and we start introducing more and more characters, they could bring in some stuff that could fill the void. So if we get another kind of like techie type character who can be the smart guy, who can be the computer guy, they can maybe come in and fill that role.
Yeah, like Echo. I mean, Echo could easily just become the computer guy.
Mm-hmm. Echo has that Data from Star Trek look, the Lobot kind of look, you know?
Yeah.
So what, we skipped kind of their whole heist fiasco here. I didn't write down quite the notes for that because it just felt like a MacGuffin Clone Wars kind of plot. But did you have any thoughts on their whole heist here in the middle of the episode?
I mean, I thought it was fun. I like a good heist movie or a heist show, so I thought it was fun. I think it was just a little bit to show off each of their abilities, but you know, like, oh, you got to do this to do this, and especially when it's science, you get to make up. It's not quite as like fun or interesting as like a real world like Mission Impossible type thing. When it's like when you can make up how chain codes work to even be like, okay, we got to do this, and then pull this blank disc to do that, and it's like, okay, that's fun, I guess, but.
And I liked in this too, like you said, they can just kind of make up their own heist logic and stuff like that. So it's sort of like you're not following the physical reality of like real world. So it didn't quite feel like a heist, but it felt fun. And I liked their idea of, oh, we're going to impound our own ship, that kind of like trick. And then of course there's she's in this ship still. And I thought like, oh, you guys really didn't think for like a second, like, oh, maybe we should like check the ship before we like impound it. Make sure nobody's in there. Make sure there's nothing we need. You know, grab our water bottles and get ready for the trip. But they're just like, no, just impound it. Like,
yeah, haven't these people ever run an insurance game before? It's like before you burn down your house, you pull out all your jewelry and all your pictures and anything of much of value that's relatively small. Like these people. Like before, if I was them and before I impounded my ship, I was like, there might be a chance we don't get this back. So let's just pull out some of the more valuable shit.
Yeah,
like the 9-year-old
child the door carrying this TV right here. I'm like, okay, I got the thing I need. I'm running out of my burning house.
Yeah. But I mean, it's fine.
Yeah, that's the type of logic holes that I feel like are going to be here all the time. Where it's like, sure, if you think about it for a few seconds, it doesn't really hold together, but it's just an animated show, you know?
Yeah, to me, at the end of the day, you have to remember this is a show that's like made for 12-year-olds, but they also keep in mind that like 30-year-olds are going to watch it. So
yeah, this is a kid show that we're just essentially nerdy enough to watch because once in a while we'll have lore that we like or characters that we like in there.
Yeah. One other thing I do wish they would show more is like Hunter is supposedly supposed to have like heightened senses, right? I wish they would like show or convey that somehow more, because like obviously we see Wrecker beat people up and do strong stuff. We see Tech do tech stuff. We see Echo also do tech stuff. I guess we basically have 2 tech guys on the show, and one of them's just a cyborg. And then Hunter is just like the leader, but supposedly has heightened senses. Like I'd love for there to be like a moment where like he hears something that the other clones don't, or sees something that the other clones don't. But so far, we haven't really gotten any of that. He's just the leader that they say has heightened senses.
Yeah, yeah, I would like to see that too, especially as they're going around these planets that could easily land in some kind of like jungle planet, and he hunts
Uh,
down like the predator,
yeah.
or like he
Uh,
has some kind of like alien that he has to hunt down, and we have a
uh,
cool hunter episode.
yeah. I mean, he's essentially Rambo, and so we could have Rambo versus like the Predator from like the Predator series. That'd be
That
awesome.
sounds incredible to me. I'm waiting for that episode now.
You know that's good. They made him look like Rambo on purpose, so you know
There's no
that
way they didn't.
there's that thought has crossed their mind, and there will definitely be an alien that is like reminiscent of the Predator or reminiscent of the Xenomorph.
And they're definitely gonna give us Rambo versus Boba Fett or something like that. Like
Yeah,
you need to have that in
yeah.
the show.
Oh yeah, because
Rambo
we have
versus Boba Fett.
yeah, because we have young Boba Fett. He's gonna be like what, like 16, 17 at this point.
Angsty teenager Boba Fett.
Yeah,
I can't wait for that.
before he wrecks shop with Din Djarin. Before he goes in the Sarlacc pit.
The epic heel turn of Boba Fett.
He just, if J.J. Abrams was writing this show, 17-year-old Boba Fett would walk by a Sarlacc pit and be like, wow, hopefully I don't ever end up in one of those, and then just turn to the camera.
Yep. Well, that's basically the episode. I don't know how much
Yeah.
else we have to talk about in the
Yeah.
plot.
Yeah, we have our predictions. I mean, we kind of went through the entire plot. Obviously, the show ends with surprise Omega still with the team, and I think to me this was like a speed run of like the first season and a half of The Mandalorian, of just like, hey, Omega's gonna be with them now, and they're not gonna ditch her, which I think is one of the benefits of them being able to communicate with each other, which obviously the Mandalorian doesn't have because Grogu can't talk. But I feel like with Omega being able to be like, hey, I want to be with you guys. I don't want to be with some random guy I just met and random family. It's easier to just speed up that plot line.
Yeah, I like that. I like that she'll just be part of the team now. I don't need like my biggest frustration of Mandalorian sometimes is like, okay, I feel like I'm tired of this Baby Yoda plot line, and like we've had 2 entire seasons of trying to find him a place among the characters, and Omega from the second episode, she has her place, and I'm excited to see what that's going to be now that she can grow in that role.
Yeah. And so, time for predictions. You have probably the more bigger prediction, where mine are small. My first one is the guy that talks about the chain codes and the hologram. My prediction is that is going to be revealed. I mean, I don't know how much revealed to be, but I think that's Admiral Rampart, who I believe will be the big villain of the series.
I like that. I'm ready to see the big villain come in because I want to see who their big like overarching villain is going to be, because it's not going to be Tarkin. I don't think. You mentioned that guy, so I think that'll be him.
Yeah,
but I wonder how much we're going to get of the legacy characters like Tarkin.
Yeah, I think Tarkin's one of those guys that's like in the season premiere and the season finale, and that's kind of it. Maybe appears one time in the middle. Like he like we'll see the first time we see Admiral Rampart in person, like assigned to go look for the Bad Batch. It'll be like Tarkin who assigns him, and then we won't see him until like the finale again or something. But yeah, I fully believe that's Admiral Rampart. He looks like an animated version of the Hot Toy figure. And that'd be the perfect place to like drop a tease of like who your villain's gonna be. And then my second prediction is, I originally said like Maul is the big bad, and like them trying to take down Maul is gonna be the big storyline of the first season. But now that I'm less certain that Maul's even in this series, based on the previous episode of what we've actually seen and not my prediction, I think the overall plot line of this season, or maybe the series as a whole, is going to be the clone uprising against the Empire, and then the clones just getting fucking destroyed, and Kamino probably getting wiped off the map of the galaxy.
Yeah, that's exactly what I think this is going to be going for. That does lead into my theory here a bit, because that's tie into what I expect is going to be the end of Kamino throughout this episode, this series.
Yeah, I could definitely see that's when Cut comes back to like rejoin the clones to fight against the Empire.
That would be a badass thing. I really do think that'll be an exciting and powerful kind of ending to this series.
I hope he doesn't die though. I hope it's like they lost and he's him and like the Bad Batch are like the last survivors, unless that's what the series story is, and then he dies. with them. But I kind of hope he doesn't die. He obviously has a shorter lifespan in general. Like, he's not going to be in these kids' lives very long. We already see he has that gray patch of hair, so he's going to be alive for what, maybe like 10, 15 more years.
Yeah, and depending on what happens with these clones,
Yeah,
if he lives a natural life, yeah, 10 to 15. But I don't know
yeah,
what's the future of the clones even going to
yeah,
be because we don't
yeah.
see much of them outside of the few that come back in Rebels.
And then my final prediction, because like Crosshair to me is not like the big villain of this series. So I think part of the path of this series, and maybe this is the season finale, is them, because we've like dropped hints of the inhibitor chip, but like none of them have it, right? So
Mm-hmm.
like them learning about it doesn't matter. So eventually they do have to meet Rex. They've dropped that tease already. Rex can tell them everything they need to know about the inhibitor chip because he's had his removed. So I think he's going to tell them about the inhibitor chip, and I think at some point they're going to remove it from Crosshair, and Crosshair is going to return to the Bad Batch.
I think that's a good bet. I know I predicted last episode that he's going to get killed by the end of the season, so I definitely think they at least go in one direction or the other. I
No,
think Crosshair maybe is a big bad for, or at least maybe like the secondary bad for the first season compared to this Imperial guy. Maybe he's like the muscle of this Imperial guy.
no.
And then by the end of the first season, either I agree with you, he's either redeemed, your theory, or I think he's dead, my
Yeah.
theory.
I wouldn't even say redeemed because it's basically like mind control. Like if they take the inhibitor chip and he's like, "I'm sorry, guys. Like I don't know what came over me, blah blah blah." And then I don't think he has to like earn his way back into the group. I feel like it's like we got our boy back, and that's kind of it.
Yep, Star Wars logic. You do one
Yeah.
good thing and then you're just good.
Well, I mean, it's not like he had a choice. It's still mind control, I think.
That is true, it's true.
Uh, but I want to hear your prediction before we move on to our conversation about the order to watch Star Wars in.
So Omega has got my mind running a lot the last two episodes. I
I can
think
tell.
I'm really curious what her character direction is going to be because, like I said in the premiere, I've always connected to like the lore and the Force and the kind of mystical sides of Star Wars more than the action sides of stuff. So I'm going to enjoy the Bad Batch action because it looks really good and I like the characters, but like emotionally I'm more invested in like the Force angle of Star Wars, and I think that she's going to tie into that because I do think people have been thinking she's Force sensitive. I think that's definitely
Yeah,
going to be true.
there was a moment here that confirmed that for me. I can tell you what that moment was,
Go
but
for it.
it was when Cut asked Hunter. He's like, basically Hunter's like, yeah, she's like us. She's a clone, but she's a messed up clone or like a whatever word he used. And Cut's like, but or Hunter says like she was made by accident, and Cut's like, yeah, that's not right. And Hunter's like, why? And Cut's like, because they don't do anything by accident. And to me,
Mm-hmm.
or whatever he said, however he phrased that, that's the moment where I was like, I will be shocked at this point if she's not force sensitive.
Yeah, and I think she was made that way on purpose because I do think Camino has this technology, and I think they didn't just create these clones to be nice to Palpatine. I think they have their own agenda with the cloning technology, and I think this is part of it. I think they're experimenting with creating force sensitive beings, and Palpatine, we know from Rise of Skywalker, has been planning for practically this whole entire time, trying to figure out immortality. What
Yeah,
all the way back to Darth Plagueis, his original master, who kind of taught him the value of having that power, but also being the only one who has that power. Like he kills Darth Plagueis because he wants to be the only one who knows of
yeah,
immortality, the only one who can live forever. And I think the reason Tarkin was so interested in the Bad Batch in the first place wasn't necessarily because, oh, the defective clones, that's interesting or whatever. I think it was
uh,
because he's curious about how you can make those alterations to clones and still have them survive. He's curious about how you can alter DNA in that way and
yeah,
still have them survive because I think Tarkin is going to be retconned into being part of this plan along the way, along with Moff Gideon, along with other kind of characters like that, where they've all been involved in
yeah,
Palpatine's Grandmaster plan, whether they know it or not,
yeah,
to find immortality. And I think Omega is going to be part of that because we did mention that I think there's going to be a siege of Camino. We talked about that just a couple minutes ago. That I think the Empire, one way or another, is going to take down Camino, and I think part of the reason for that is that they want to destroy pretty much all evidence of cloning in the galaxy. You know, they
yeah,
don't want
yeah,
anybody else to have that technology other than them. So they're going to go out of the way to destroy Kamino. They're going to go out of the way to
Oh,
steal that technology. And that leads us all the way into like Mandalorian and Snoke and the way that Palpatine has been trying to create these force sensitive beings through cloning. I think they call them strand casters or something like
yeah,
that. Make up this word for them. So I think Omega is essentially going to be like the original strand cast. She's going to be the one that was created artificially out of DNA to be force sensitive, and that's she's going to be what leads to Snoke, what leads to ultimately Palpatine being alive again in Rise of
yeah,
Skywalker. I think she's just going to be kind of a launching pad into like how Palpatine was able to unlock immortality through cloning and through the Force like that, and how he was able to create Snoke. So I essentially think Omega is a precursor to Snoke, and Omega was Snoke all along.
yeah. What if that is true? What if Snoke was actually a woman and we just didn't notice?
Yeah, you were just not very 2021 of you to not notice that.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, I definitely think it's possible. That she is, uh, like kind of that experiment. Like it's definitely where I'm leaning is like she's like this clone experiment trying to make someone force sensitive.
Because I do think Palpatine, we're gonna really see that the goal of a lot of these shows, I think, is going to be to make Rise of Skywalker good. In the way that
Uh,
the Clone Wars,
yeah,
I felt like the whole entire goal of the show for every episode was like, okay, how do we take the prequels and enhance
yeah,
them and make them good and make them a bit more watchable and increase the stakes for the characters and things like that. And I think now we're going to get to the point where it's like, okay, we have these very divisive sequel trilogies, and in order to go forward with the movies, we kind of have to have the fans not be like vitriolly angry about these movies,
yeah,
So maybe we need to have these TV shows go back and
yeah.
fix things that are shitty. Like we're gonna probably see Exegol at some point in one of these shows, and we've
Maybe
seen
we'll
it in the
see
comics
people on
recently.
Exegol who could have built those 10 billion fucking ships.
Yeah, and I think that's all kind of stuff we're gonna get introduced to as this
Yeah,
goes along. We see these dark cultist kind of followers that Palpatine's growing up, whether it's Moff Gideon, whether it's Tarkin, whether it's maybe this new Imperial guy coming in this episode, whether it's the guy from Mandalorian who is looking for the child. I think those are all
oh
kind of,
yeah, that
and I
nerdy
think it
guy.
even goes back to the Aftermath books, and you had
Yeah,
those hooded
uh,
characters who were searching after Sith artifacts and trying to
yeah,
find Vader's old mask and that kind of stuff. I think if they really wanted to, they could do a couple tweaks here and move some things around and retcon a couple things here and there and turn Rise of Skywalker from a practically unwatchable movie into something that, similarly to the prequels, retroactively becomes watchable.
yeah. And what was the season one, episode one of Bad Batch called? Aftermath.
Aftermath. And I do, my final prediction here is that by the end of the first season, maybe Hunter gets shot or something, or maybe Crosshair gets shot and they're dying, and we get a moment where Omega uses the Force Heal. I think they're gonna try and make the Force Heal make sense, and they're gonna have Omega, because of how uniquely she was created. She has some, and she has that kind of empathetic quality to her, whatever that's gonna be, some kind of Force related empathy. I think that's going to feed its way into the Force healing as well. So I think they're going to bring that in this show in a way to make it not be such an ass pull in Rise of Skywalker.
I got it. I got the final like moments of season one. So they got Crosshair. They know about everything about the inhibitor chip. They realize that's what made Crosshair turn on them. They kidnap Crosshair. They're trying to pull it out of him. Uh, but Admiral Rampart and this is all while the siege of Camino is going on. They're on Camino doing it. Uh, Admiral Rampart and the stormtroopers are trying to get, or other clone troopers are trying to get into the building, trying to break it down. They go in, shots, blaster bolts are going everywhere. The droid repairing uh, Crosshair gets taken out. Crosshair's, vitals are going down. Omega steps up and force heals him.
I like it. I think she'll probably use it on either Hunter or Crosshair. I think it'll be, oh, she saves the leader, the main guy that is her
Yeah,
idol, or she saves the guy who would have been the bad
yeah,
guy and is part of his like turnaround moment.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, I could see either or.
And I would love that. I think what I like the most about Clone Wars is that they were able to take the prequels and really enhance them in a lot of ways and build on the flaws without totally throwing it
Yeah.
away. They weren't like, okay, that didn't happen. They were like, okay, how do we take that stupid thing that happened and make it not stupid? you know?
Okay. I just had as we were talking, I had a massive like epiphany
Oh no.
of. No, I think you'll like this. So like one of the big complaints is people talk about how like where has force healing been, right? Like why didn't Obi-Wan force heal Qui-Gon and stuff like that, right? Like where has force healing been? But then we look at the Jedi as they're presented in the prequels, and they've been basically like devoid of emotion. All emotion is pulled out of them. And you look at the Sith, and they operate purely on emotion, right? Like anger, hatred, blah blah blah. Jedi aren't allowed to love. What if you should pull on emotion, which is kind of what the prequels are saying, and fans don't get that. Like when they say, "Oh, Rey's a bad Jedi because she has emotions," I'm like, "Well, then you saw the prequels, but you did not understand the prequels, you moron." Um, so what if like to have the power to do something like force heal, you have to like do it out of like love and compassion, and so that's why Rey was able, like she saw it in the old Jedi text, was able to do it to Kylo and that one snake monster thing. Grogu was able to do it to um, Griff Karga, and eventually Omega will be able to do it to Hunter or Crosshair.
Yeah, I think that would be a good move. I think
And like maybe, and if that's what happens, that's my official headcanon. It's the only way you can do it is really pulling on the emotions of like love and compassion.
I like that idea because I do believe Sith, like you said, they're so focused on anger and rage, and they're able to kind of like suck the life force out of people in a way. Especially if you buy that theory that Palpatine sort of sucked the life force out of Padme and gave it to Anakin, and was able to
Yeah,
like that's how he was able to get Anakin to
yeah.
barely survive that Vader becoming surgery.
Yeah, and Vader was only able, like, Vader should have died from his injuries, but the only thing keeping himself alive was anger and hatred. Maul should have died as well, but the only thing keeping him alive was his anger and hatred for Obi-Wan. So it's like, okay, we've learned you can keep yourself from, like, dying with emotion of anger and hatred. So what if the opposite of that, of, like, anger and hatred is love, you can use that emotion to, like, heal other people. Makes
Yeah, I
sense.
think that makes a
I
lot of
just
sense
had the
because
greatest epiphany I've ever. Like I've never felt smarter in my life.
I really like that a lot. I like your epiphany, Joe. I think it makes sense because we've seen, even in what I was just explaining, that Palpatine has to go through all of this decades long of
Yeah,
process just to keep himself like afloat as like a Voldemort esque essence
yeah,
in Rise of Skywalker. And I think you see that that's what it takes to keep yourself alive, like selfishly using the Force against its own will. Like that's what the Sith kind of do. They manipulate the Force and use it to their own will. And I think that, like you said, doing that out of hope and love and love for others is what lets you heal other people, which I think is really interesting too. And not necessarily heal yourself, but it lets you
yeah.
give your life force to others. It's essentially the opposite of what Palpatine does.
And we've never met um Plagueis. Like Plagueis could be a Sith Lord a lot more like Dooku. Or Dooku was like use the dark side, but he was more human. I guess I should say. Like he was more like in the middle. He was a lot like Kylo as well. Uh, where maybe he did understand that aspect and he could have like true love for people, and that's why Palpatine has that line in Revenge of the Sith of he could save others from dying but not himself, and Palpatine probably didn't understand that, and it's because Palpatine could like never love anybody, so he
I
didn't
like that.
he didn't have that realization. Like we could meet Plagueis, and Plagueis could be like just like Dooku, where it's like yes, you are a Sith Lord, but you are kind of not a crazy person. Um,
I like this direction though. I do think that explaining Palpatine's resurrection was the biggest hurdle that Rise of Skywalker had to get over. Like, okay, how in the world is Palpatine still alive? And they just pretty much
my
don't
thing,
explain it.
the thing that annoys me is like the first leak. I know this isn't a Rise of Skywalker review, and we're definitely going to go over like an hour talking about our conversation at the end, but I don't like think that'll last that long because I didn't think we'd get an hour talking about this episode. I thought the episode review would be like 20 minutes,
Yeah,
but
we also got on this Palpatine theory. We're going.
so the original leak that I heard like the weekend the movie came out that I thought was awesome was Palpatine died and then he possessed using the Force, like basically possessed his own dead body, which I thought was like kind of fucking badass and cool. But I guess the explanation is he possessed a clone of his body, but his clone body wasn't Force sensitive, and so like it couldn't handle the power and deteriorated, and that's why it looks all decayed and gross, which I think is kind of whatever. We're like
It was
him.
whack, but I do think these shows are course correcting. And they mentioned a Mandalorian, like some kind of throwaway line when they go to that cloning facility in episode, I don't remember what it was, Siege, it was called in
Yeah.
season 2. I think it was episode like
The
4 or 5.
siege. Yeah. Yeah.
And they go into that cloning facility and they play the Snoke music and you see this cloning embryos are all kind of around, and they get that line where he says like all the subjects keep decaying too quickly, and even in the Kylo Ren comic, Snoke is talking about how like his body's decaying too quickly and he's
Yeah.
kind of falling apart. And I think if that can retroactively make the Palpatine thing make a little bit more
Yeah.
sense. Like he was able to create this vessel to put himself into, but it's not lasting long enough. It's just falling apart slowly because he needs someone like Rey who's powerful enough to
Yeah.
hold how his like
Yeah.
force essence
And,
essentially.
yeah. And like I don't know, like I just they didn't explain it enough that because like some people walked out of that movie thinking Palpatine just like didn't die, which isn't
Because
what
that's what I
happened.
thought when I first watched it. I was like, shit, I guess Palpatine's just like alive or whatever.
No, but yeah, he definitely died. It's just they use Sith magic to like put his essence into another clone body, which I'm like, okay. I would have much rather preferred he was dead and possessed his own dead body because that's badass. But I think we've talked about this kind of theory
We
enough.
have, I think, yeah, I'm not a big fan of Palpatine being alive at all, but I think these shows can maybe make that a little cooler. So
Yeah.
hopefully that's what they do.
Yeah. Any final notes on the Bad Batch before we move to our final conversation about Star Wars Watch Order?
No final notes. Good episode. Can't wait for
Yeah.
next week.
Yeah.
We
Good,
talked
solid,
enough.
average episode. All right. So Star Wars Watch. I'll kick off this conversation. Like before the show is really kicked off, my like ideal for me normally if you've seen it before, watch it in whatever order you want. I usually if I'm rewatching it, will rewatch it chronologically. So I like just the movies. I'd do like 1, 2, 3, Solo, Rogue One, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. But with all these shows and stuff now, but if I was showing someone Star Wars for the first time, I would just start with all of the movies because I think the shows are always going to be secondary to the movies. I don't think there's ever going to be a movie that comes out that it's like, okay, to understand this movie, you need to understand this show, unless they release like a Mandalorian movie or something like that. But
Mhm.
so I would start Rogue One because it has modern special effects, like modern action. You don't need like obviously there's references to movies that were released before it, but nothing really big that you're like missing out on. Anything you need to know, like through pop culture, right? Like who Vader is and all of that.
Mhm.
So I would start with Rogue One, and then obviously right after that do 4, 5, 6. Watch the original trilogy, the first thing people ever saw. It continues off Rogue One, and then after that you want to show them 1, 2, and 3 so they can learn all about the rise of Darth Vader and the rise of the Emperor. And then immediately you want to show them, okay, what did the Empire look like? You show them Solo, and watching Solo gives them an introduction of Solo back before they go and learn the importance of the dice back before they watch 7, 8, and 9, where the dice kind of come into play. And then that's kind of that. But my question is, like, as far as the shows go, like, where do these shows come into play, especially with like all these shows um, using Order 66 as a plot point?
Yeah, it's rough when they start interweaving like that. When you get towards the end of Clone Wars and then you get into Revenge of the
Oh,
Sith, you get to the beginning of Bad Batch, and all of a sudden it's like, okay, you pause here, and then you
yeah,
go to the next TV next door and you watch Clone Wars, and then you pause here.
yeah,
But that's obviously not
yeah,
reasonable.
yeah. Here are my thoughts, and I want to hear what you think. Is like obviously there's like resistance. If I were to watch chronologically, I would do like 1, 2, 3, or well, I would watch 1, 2. I would watch all of Clone Wars except for the final arc, those final 4 episodes. I would then watch 3, Revenge of the Sith. Then I would watch those final 4 Clone Wars episodes, uh, because then they all kind of play on that, and then I would just go straight into the Bad Batch.
Interesting, because I'm the type of person where I loved Clone Wars when I watched it. I go back and watch it a lot, but there's no reason to watch all of Clone Wars, I don't think, unless you're
Yeah,
very much into
yeah,
Clone Wars. I think there's tons you can skip. So in my mind, there's a handful of essential episodes of Clone Wars. I won't go through all of them, but I think stuff like Mortis and stuff that sets up characters. And essentially, your goal in Clone Wars is you're going to grasp Anakin and Obi-Wan's relationship. You're going to get the rise and fall of uh, Ahsoka. Pretty much, you're just gonna get like her arc as a character from the Jedi Padawan to the leaving the Order, and then you want to get a bit of the Maul, because Maul I
Yeah,
think is a highlight of Clone Wars.
yeah,
Maul, along with sort of like his relationship with Sidious, and I think all that kind of stuff really is what is the golden era of Clone
yeah,
Wars.
yeah,
So I think you can easily pretty much skip most of the first season. Just watch the ones that interest you essentially
yeah.
on most of these first few seasons, and
I think
I
I
think
think you should watch as much as people shit on the Clone Wars movie. I think you should start with the Clone Wars movie because it does introduce Ahsoka and stuff like that.
I think that is true. I think it's hard when you're giving someone Star Wars for the first time. You're assuming like they lived a blindfolded life. They don't know who these characters are, but so like if you don't know who Ahsoka is in any way, I think you do kind of got to watch the Clone Wars movie. But I think you got to give them that caveat too. Like this is not the quality that you're in for with the rest of
Yeah,
this.
yeah, yeah,
I think most of the first like half of Clone Wars you can skip the stuff that doesn't interest you and just watch the ones that seem cool. And essentially you can get some cool
yeah,
stuff like Layer Grievous isn't necessarily an important episode, but I think it introduces a really important character that's shines in the Clone Wars. So stuff
yeah.
like that isn't a vital episode for the plot, but it's one that I
Yeah.
recommend.
Yeah, any episode with Hondo and or Cad Bane, you should definitely watch.
And once you get towards the end and it starts interweaving, I'm actually of the mindset as I did it recently. Uh, you watch the final arc you watch as you're watching Clone Wars. So essentially, you watch Phantom Menace, Attack of the Clones, like you would. And now you watch everything good in the Clone Wars that you want to watch. You get to the final season, and that's the one where it's like, okay, these are all pretty good episodes. You might as well watch them all to get that finale
Yeah,
to the
you
Clone
especially have to
Wars.
watch Bad Batch now if you're doing like a complete rewatch just to be introduced to them. I'm gonna rewatch that arc before next week Friday.
And when I get to that point at the end of Clone Wars, where there's that flash for the epilogue sort of work, jumps ahead after Revenge of the Sith, I pause there. So I've seen Order 66 from that perspective, and I pause there for the epilogue. I go back, I watch Revenge of the Sith. I know
Yeah,
pausing is cheating, but the epilogue is
yeah,
the epilogue.
yeah,
And if you really want to, you can watch it all the way through. But if I'm doing it for
yeah,
full effect, I pause it there so I can see the fall of Anakin, and the rise
yeah,
of Darth Vader in Revenge of the Sith.
yeah,
And then once you finally get the Order 66 montage in that, I think it hits way harder when you've already seen the final arc of the Clone Wars. You've already met all these Jedi characters, so it's not just a montage of people dying. You I spend the whole movie now waiting for that to happen, and you
yeah.
know it's coming.
The true cheating and the best way to do it, and the way I'll probably do it, is go online and find the edit someone did where they edited together the final 4 episodes in Revenge of the Sith into some like 6 hour long thing.
Yeah, that's probably the best way to do it. And then I would go,
I guess it's not even the final arc; it's just really the final episode that crosses over with Revenge of the Sith, right? Or am I wrong?
yeah, it's well because the final arc when they mention like, oh, me and Anakin were going to save Palpatine,
Oh
you
yeah,
know,
it
so it's
is.
like that set up for they're just about to go to the first scene of the movie,
Yeah,
you know, so it's kind of
yeah,
happening in the background.
yeah. And
And I
then
would go right from that epilogue where they end the Clone Wars and the title card of the Clone Wars comes up, and you go right from that to the premiere of Bad Batch. Don't even stop. Don't even hit anything else. Just go to hit play. Go right from that final image of Vader and the title card coming up to the red card burning off. It says Bad Batch. You're in for the next show. Right to the next show. It
yeah,
feels like a great transition
yeah.
point.
And none of the other shows really crossed over with the movies. I don't think timeline wise. Like Resistance does, but fuck
Yeah, don't
Resistance.
watch Resistance.
Basically,
That
you can watch. Basically, you would watch Resistance season 1, The Force Awakens, Resistance season 2.
I'm not gonna lie to you though. If someone hadn't seen Star Wars before, and they were like, "What do I watch?" I'm telling them to skip Solo. I'm telling them, do not watch Solo at least until you're done with stuff. Like you have to have a context of you have to give a shit about Maul. You have to see where this is going. You have to really
Yeah,
be invested in Star Wars. So I think get the most out of Solo to get all those connected little moments and things like that. So
yeah.
I'd
Like when they talk
warn
about
people to
killing,
stick away from
or
Solo.
I don't know. You just have bad opinions. Solo is great.
Solo is fine, but I don't think if you're new to Star Wars, I feel like you watch that and you're like, this is like everything I didn't want
Yeah,
Star Wars to be.
yeah. I don't know. I just
And I'd
like.
be honest, I don't even know if I'd tell them to watch the sequels. I don't know if I think I would tell them to stay away from those for a little bit.
I think if you. My thing is okay. If you've watched Rogue One, you've watched 4, 5, 6. You've watched 1, 2, and 3, and you've watched, and you've gotten that far, and you're like, I've been enjoying this. I really like this. I'm a fan of what I've seen. I think that you have to watch. At that point, they're a Star Wars fan. They have to at least watch all the movies.
I think you watch the Clone Wars and Rebels and all that stuff before you get into the sequels because you want to. I think you want to like get all of that context and everything else, and then you go into the sequels as like this other thing because the sequels
Yeah,
just don't really,
yeah.
for me, fulfill anything that the rest of it sets up. So if I got to the end of Rise of
Unless,
Skywalker and someone was like, "Oh, you got like 10 seasons of TV to watch," I'd be like, "I'm not watching that. That movie was shit." But if you get the all of that context before you get into the sequels, I think you're like, "Okay, I'm in already." You know.
especially if the Bad Batch and like Mandalorian and stuff do a great job setting up the sequels, like maybe there's something with Snoke and we see like his more origin and stuff like that.
Yeah, that's how I feel too. The same reason that you recommend watching Clone Wars before you watch Revenge of the Sith because it does so much
Yeah,
active work to make that movie
yeah,
better.
yeah,
So I think if these shows could do that, there's no reason not to watch them before you
yeah,
watch Rise
yeah,
of Skywalker. If anything you can do to make the movie better for you is a thing you should do.
yeah, yeah, for sure. All right. I think we've figured out that conversation. Watch Solo and watch the sequels. That's what we've learned.
Definitely don't watch Solo. Watch the sequels if you are desperate for Star Wars content.
Yeah, I don't know. People are haters, including Tristan. All right. Final thoughts on whether it's Bad Batch or this conversation before we end the stream and say goodbye to our one viewer.
Yeah, I can't wait for more Bad Batch. I'm more into it than I thought I was going to be into it. Whether it's for this crazy Omega theory that Omega is actually Snoke, is actually Palpatine, who's actually Baby Yoda
Yeah.
all along. But I'm into it, and don't watch Solo. Don't watch Rise of Skywalker. I love Last Jedi. Hopefully, they make a sequel to it someday.
Okay. Well, he has bad opinions. Hashtag Omega is Ray's mom.